Now, dear listener, you know I've talked to you a lot on the Politicrat Daily podcast about making your own podcast. And let me tell you something, Anchor gives you the best opportunity to do that. It's free of charge. Yes, it's free. And there are lots of creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your own phone or computer. How about that? And you can even add songs to your podcast from Spotify. It's really wonderful. You can do this, and it really is very easy. And Anchor will even distribute your podcast for you. It can be heard on all kinds of platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. And you can make some money too. And money making is a good thing. It's everything you need in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Welcome to the Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore. It is Tuesday, June the 1st, 2021. On this edition of the Politicrat, Part 2, exactly 100 years ago today. Tulsa mass murder by white people of black people and state-sponsored terrorism in Greenwood, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Thoughts, recollections, and what we must do from here. Where do we go from here? That coming up next.
Oftentimes, black people are called on camera after something racist occurs to explain racism, to explain what happened, to explain the incident. But I can't explain why white people hate black people so much. I cannot explain the motives of the militia that came to Tulsa to agonize the peaceful protesters. I cannot explain the other white extremist groups that have antagonized Black Lives Matter protesters across the country. I can only say that the hope of people who have good hearts is that this hatred that has erupted in the country will go back underground, and not only go back under the ground, but just like evaporate.
That was Deneen Brown, the Washington Post feature writer and the reporter and co-producer of the PBS documentary Tulsa, The Fire and the Forgotten, which aired on Monday night, May 31st, 2021, on PBS stations throughout the United States. This part 2 of Tulsa terrorism against black people, state-sponsored terrorism and violence by white people against black people, will be focusing on the here and now and about what we all can do in terms of spreading the word and educating people. By the way, Deneen Brown, who did an excellent job on Tulsa, The Fire and the Forgotten, a documentary which you must see, can be found on Twitter at DENEENL Brown. Please follow her. Exactly 100 years ago today, on June the 1st, 1921, the terrorist attack against black people, the deadly terrorist attack against black people continued on in Greenwood, Tulsa, Oklahoma, here inside the United States of America. The state sponsored it. The state committed it. The police deputized Klan members, some of whom had police in their ranks. The police gave out weapons to white, violent mob members, people who wanted to kill black people. Hundreds of rifles were given out. Hundreds of rifles were given out to violent white men for the purpose not of defending themselves. And even that would not really be permitted and would be unseemly on its own. But given rifles with the express purpose of killing black people who were exercising self-defense. Dick Rowland was a black man, and you've heard about this if you listen to part 1 of this 2-part episode of the Politicrat Daily podcast. Dick Rowland was a young black boy, young black man. He was really a boy. And he was being targeted by a white lynch mob because a lie, what else is new, spread around the white community that somehow Dick Rowland had raped a white girl, which of course was a complete lie. And before you know it, you had hundreds of white men standing outside a police precinct. And word got around, and again, you heard this if you listened to yesterday's episode. Word got around in the black community that Dick Rowland, a black boy, was going to be lynched, and there was a white mob there waiting to do so. And black people defended Dick Rowland. And so they came down to the precinct as well. And then after that, you had someone white start something, and it led to an exchange of gunfire. When this white guy asked the black guy, "What are you going to do with that rifle?" And he didn't ask him exactly like that. You know what he said to him. Then he tried to wrestle the rifle away from the black man, and then that's when all hell broke loose. And then for the next nearly 18 hours, white men ran amok, violently amok, crazed, evil, and just murdered every black person they could see. Burned down their homes, burned down their town, burned down their barbershops, their dentistries, their doctors' practices, their movie theaters, their hotels, their grocery stores, everything. Between 300 and 600 black people were killed, were murdered by these white men who marauded and committed terrorist acts at the behest of the state, at the behest of the city of Tulsa. Politicians and representatives supported this terrorism by white men against black people. That must never, ever be forgotten. The state were the ones who committed a terrorist act against the people of Greenwood, the black people who lived in Greenwood, Their town was Greenwood. Their livelihood was Greenwood. That, once again, must never, ever be forgotten. Nobody in Tulsa wanted to talk about it. The black residents were too afraid to. It was too painful and too traumatic. And that's completely understandable. And the newspapers in Tulsa weren't talking about it either. There was a black newspaper that dared to, but Tulsa newspapers in general, the white ones in particular, were never going to talk about this. They didn't talk about it until the 1970s, if later than that, the 1990s. A massacre that happened 100 years ago today. And still, people's remains are being found from 100 years ago. There was a recent excavation of mass graves, and remains were found and continue to be found. More excavations are being done. As I alluded to yesterday, this violence and this state-sanctioned terrorism, and Tulsa at this time and still remains the second deadliest attack from terrorism. This massacre and state-sponsored terrorism in Tulsa, exactly 100 years ago today, remains after 9/11/2001 the second most deadliest act of terrorism ever committed on U.S. soil. Again, between 300 and 600 black people were killed, murdered by white male mobs. This violence did not take place in a vacuum. There were massacres of black people all over the United States, terrorist acts of violence committed against black people all over the country. And as I said yesterday, not confined to the South. Chicago, 1919. Detroit, 1943. New York, 1863. Washington, D.C., 1919. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, 1985. That's the move bombing that I've talked about from time to time here on the Politicrat Daily Podcast. East St. Louis, Illinois, 1917. Springfield, Illinois, 1908. Memphis, Tennessee, 1866. Wilmington, Delaware, Joe Biden's haunt, 1898. Memphis, 1866. Elaine, 1919. Clinton, 1875. Vicksburg, that's in Mississippi, 1874. Atlanta, 1906. Slocum, 1910. Slocum is Texas. Colfax, 1873. Opelousas, 1868. New Orleans, 1866. St. Bernard Parish, 1868. Rosewood, Florida. I've spoken about that a number of times here. Made into a film by John Singleton, the late, great John Singleton, back in 1997. Go and watch that movie starring Ving Rhames and Don Cheadle and Elise Neal. and John Voight as well. Rosewood, 1923, a thriving black town in Florida. Camilla, 1868, O-C, O-C-O-E-E, Ocoee, I guess, 1920, that's Florida. Eufaula, 1874, Charleston, South Carolina, 2015. You know what that massacre was, that terrorist act was in the Mother Emanuel AME Church. That's just a partial list that I just read out to you, dear listener, of the terrorist attacks on black people and against black people here in the United States in the last 100 years or so. There are many, many more. I could be reading these to you for the rest of this episode. And you know how long some of the episodes I do can be. And I thank you for listening. That is just a partial list. A partial list. And nearly all of these, in some way, state, or shape, or form, with some exceptions, were state-sanctioned acts of terrorism. Certainly in Philadelphia in 1985, when a black mayor, no less, ordered the police to drop bombs on a black family. Ended up killing them and wiping out almost a whole city block in Philadelphia in 1985. Bombs were dropped in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in Greenwood in 1921, at the behest of the police and of the politicians and the people who had power in that town. The men, the white men, the cowards, the violent men who took part, who terrorized and murdered black people. Some of these people were doctors, some of these people were firefighters, some of these people were lawyers, some of these people were bankers, teachers, police. And no one has been held accountable. Not a soul. Not one person. And we're living in a country where people actually have to now watch documentaries to understand that this happened here in the United States. And I'm not slighting the documentarians. I think all three of them, at least the three documentaries I'm aware of, I've seen two of the three. Those two being Tulsa Burning, directed by Stanley Nelson, and the film by Jonathan Silvers that I happened to catch yesterday, called Tulsa, the Fire and the Forgotten. Two of those two documentaries are terrific. I have not yet seen Dreamland, The Burning of Wall Street, and I forget the director, her name, unfortunately, but I will get that to you, I promise. And I think in comparison to the first two, one thing that all three of them have the word fire or burning in the title. Because that's what happened. The town was completely leveled by fire, by the white men who set the town on fire, burned down the entire town. And decades upon decades of wealth, hard work, organizational structure and systems and an economy had been destroyed in just around 18 hours. There's been no apology. None of these people who did this has ever been held accountable. No arrests were ever made. Their descendants have not had to reckon with anything. And there's been no reparations whatsoever as a result of any of this. And I'm just talking about Tulsa and Greenwood. I'm not talking about any of those other massacres that I just read out to you. You cannot go through a world and live in it and pretend that the United States, if you live here in particular, is somehow this greatest nation on the planet, and yet it's banning people in Oklahoma, Tulsa, from studying and learning about the Greenwood Massacre, the Tulsa Massacre, the terrorist acts. You can't claim to be this great nation if you're not even going to look at your own history. That is an impotent nation. That is a dangerously, purposefully blinded and blind nation. By choice. In just over a month, many people here in the United States, perhaps you included, dear listener, are going to be celebrating July the 4th and the 245th anniversary of this country's birth as the United States. And hardly anybody who celebrates is going to even care about what happened in Greenwood. Memorial Day took place yesterday. And maybe tomorrow I will talk about Memorial Day a bit more and some of the things that happened yesterday that I do want to talk about. But today is not the day for that. This is the 100-year mark of a terrorist attack that should be commemorated every single year beyond Greenwood and Tulsa. And it should be remembered around the entire United States of America. Every single year it should be commemorated. We have no problem doing this with 9/11/2001 when it's a foreign terrorist attack. But when it's a terrorist attack that happens here by white Americans, all of a sudden, people want to pretend it never happened. White people, some of them, want to pretend, many of them, want to pretend it never happened. White people in the power structure specifically pretend that this never, ever happened. And there are always exceptions. But I'm not here for exceptions. I'm here for what the truth is. And it's the truth that there are so many people who live in Tulsa, who live around this country, who are white, who do not want black people here. They do not want you here. Their behavior says it, the laws say it, the police say it, the history says it, the system says it. The racism and the discrimination say it. The workplaces say it. It's beyond obvious. It's right in your face. And this has been state sanctioned. State sanctioned violence, whether it's against Ahmaud Arbery, against George Floyd, against Sandra Bland, Rekia Boyd, or Tatiana Jefferson. And since Reconstruction, the end of Reconstruction, in the 1870s, the late 1870s, around 1877, this violence has continued to intensify, this white violence against black people. What exactly is being done to end it?
We want an immediate end to the police brutality and mob attacks against the so-called Negroes throughout the United States. Yes, a complete end to the police brutality and mob attacks that our people are confronted by every single day, every single week, every single month, every single year across the land.
Welcome back. It was on June 1st, 1921, that the terrorist violence against black people by white people raged on. As I said earlier, hundreds of black people were killed. Hundreds of them. It should also be pointed out once again, as it was in part one of this two-part episode, that black people fought back valiantly and zealously represented and defended their town as it was under attack. There were some black people who were able to save their businesses, save their homes. There were some black people who were able to defend their homes. The church, a church that was under attack, managed to stand upright and be saved by the efforts of people who saved one of the churches, where the other dozens of churches were not so fortunate. There were people who did their utmost best. You have to understand something here. The infrastructure and ecosystem of what was called Black Wall Street, coined by Booker T. Washington, and coined so because of the immense wealth and control that black people had over their own towns. You have to understand that ecosystem was really strong and very tight indeed. And you had people who cared, who ran their own town. Black people were able to do this all over the United States after Reconstruction. And there were land treaties with Native Americans that allowed for them to have parcels of land that even the United States government, I shouldn't say even, but the government promised 40 acres and a mule, and we never got that. But Native Americans, who had actually enslaved some black people, gave them land in treaties from Reconstruction and ended up allowing for, 1866, these treaties did this and gave black people parcels of land, acres and acres of land. And black people, newly freed, started to be self-sufficient to do what they knew they could always do, what they've always done, what we've always done. What we were doing on the African continent before we got invaded and kidnapped and brought to the United States, or it was called America or whatever at the time, in chains. Self-sufficiency, self-determination, being able to build from scratch. Why would it be so surprising to people to think that there were thriving black towns all over the country, particularly in the South and the Southwest, like Rosewood in the Southeast in Florida? Why would that shock anybody? And then we were forced to build all of these other things. I mean, we had built the White House when we were in chains. We'd built pyramids long before we were enslaved and brought here to the United States. It built the pyramids on the African continent, in Egypt specifically in the African continent. Built all manner of things, invented, created, had infrastructures, systems, doctors, dentists, law, all of that. That's not just started. There would be no reason to think that, somehow black people couldn't do this. That was the lie that was being told all across the United States and in the United Kingdom. You black people can't build anything. And they knew that this was a lie. when they were saying it. And then when we build something, white people would burn it down. They couldn't deal with it. They couldn't handle black excellence. It wasn't even so much black excellence. It was black ingenuity and the ability to just do for self. And all of this garbage, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. These Republicans in particular, these conservatives, would tell you that. And when we did pull ourselves up, when we did it ourselves, these same people would come in and destroy our towns, burn them to the ground, kill people. As I said earlier, many white people do not want us here. It's in the laws, it's in the history, it's in the present, it's in the discrimination, it's in the last hired, first fired, it's in everything. The police departments, your workplace, where there's virtually no black person in a position of power, in the newsrooms in this country, I keep talking about that. No representation. The medical profession doesn't want you, doesn't want a black woman. Oh, go home. We don't want you here. We don't want you in a hospital sick. We want you to go home and die. Dr. Susan Moore. You remember Dr. Susan Moore. Facebook journals almost every day with a video talking about how members of the medical profession that she belongs to told her to go home. She died, and didn't have to. Serena Williams having to beg, drag herself out of her own bed and say, you're going to do these damn tests on me, damn it. She would have died. Had she not done that, most likely she probably would have died. They do not want us here. That's not just me talking. That's the facts talking. That's the truth talking. That's the history talking. It's all around you. Look around you. George Floyd, Tatiana Jefferson, Sandra Bland, Eric Garner, Dante Wright. I can go on and on and on. Emmett Till. The atrocity at Moore's Ford Bridge. Read up about that. I've talked about that before too. Moore's Ford Bridge in Georgia. Another massacre. When a politician tells you this is not who we are, and that politician is talking about the United States, make sure you send that politician a tersely worded letter, email, or tweet, or phone call, making it very clear that they are ignorant to the history and the present that engulfs them. Because no rational person can come here and say that this is not who we are. Tell them about Tulsa, Greenwood, Rosewood, and all of the things that have been happening ever since. Welcome back. And thank you, dear listeners, for listening to this edition of the Politicrat and for any episode of this podcast. Of course, it's available on numerous platforms: Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, and Google Podcasts, and so many others, Amazon, Audible. You can listen to this podcast on a number of different platforms, anytime, anywhere. So thank you for your dedication. In this part 2 of the state-sponsored terrorism and white violence that murdered black people all over Greenwood, Tulsa, Oklahoma, exactly 100 years ago today. One of the things that I want to focus on, as I've now made it very clear about where we are, is on what happens next in the town and what people there are doing and what we can do. I alluded to this in some part in yesterday's episode, in part 1. Today, here in part 2, what I want you to be aware of is more of what some of the present residents and politicians who are close to the black community in Tulsa, in Greenwood, are saying and doing, and what they are thinking and reflecting on. And they will describe the reality of what the situation is right now, right this second, in Greenwood, in Tulsa, Oklahoma. You're going to be hearing right now, and I want to thank Roland Martin for this, from Roland Martin Unfiltered. You're going to be hearing this portion of an interview by a city council person, and she is going to lay out for you some of the real realities that are going on, the realities right now on the ground. I believe her name is Vanessa Hill Hudson or something of that nature. I don't want to get her name wrong, but I apologize if I have done so, and I apologize anyway. You're going to hear her now talk about some of what is going on and these commissions that are now being propped up, like Greenwood Rising. Greenwood Rising is a front. It is a corporate and state-friendly project that has nothing to do with the black people in the community of Tulsa, in the community of Greenwood. This is all a feel-good, backslapping endeavor. Some black people have pulled out, a lot of them have pulled out of being involved with Greenwood Rising because it is a complete front and a fraud. Because none of what's going on with Greenwood Rising is helping out any of the descendants of this terroristic violence, the descendants of these survivors, the descendants of the people murdered. None of the things that so-called Greenwood Rising is doing is going toward helping the descendants of the victims, of the killed, of the survivors, of the community, period. Nothing is happening. It's all a corporate feel-good front. There is a black statewide official or legislator who is in charge, or one of the people who is co-founding or spearheading Greenwood Rising. And he's being trotted out all over television. I've noticed that recently. But this guy is a front. Kevin Matthews is his name. Greenwood Rising is a front and a fraud. And Greenwood Rising for whom is what you should be thinking here as you listen to the councilwoman.
I call it empty symbolism. We're good at that in Tulsa. We're good at looking like we're doing something, trying to look like we're not racist. But in the meantime and in between time, we're not doing anything that's going to really repair, that's going to restore, that's going to atone. And that's what we're good at in Tulsa. And in the state, we're good at doing those things. But when we're talking about putting initiatives in place that's going to actually change the status quo, that's going to improve quality of life, that's going to change the trajectory of a community, because the community is still suffering too.
Right.
Certainly the victims and their descendants, but the community as a whole continues to suffer as a result of the massacre. And so very little. But what we have to do first is apologize officially and then work on atonement. And that's not really what we're good at. We're good at telling you what you're going to get. We're going to give you this. We're going to give you this history center. We're going to give you that, and you need to accept it. We know that there are mass graves throughout this community. We know of some through historical recollections, specifically where they are, but we know that there's rumors of other locations. And so 20 years ago, that investigation started to uncover where these mass graves were. But at the time, the mayor stopped it. It was too divisive for whatever reason. Who knows what the reasons were? And so that was something that was started, but it abruptly ended. We've had the mayor some years ago say, I apologize, but there was no atonement, right? There was nothing following up, so it's empty.
So it was a statement.
It was a statement. We've even had the chief of police, our former chief of police, said he apologized, but nothing to follow. Certainly not any policies that we know still impact the black community detrimentally in our city. And so it's all empty promises. It's all empty symbolism. I see the Greenwood History Center as a symbolism, and I'm for one. I'm just sick of the symbolism. I'm not going to go to any more tree dedications. I'm not going to any more bench dedications, park dedications. I'm sick of all of that because none of that improves the quality of life from our community. None of that atones. None of it. It's empty symbolism. And so that's what we're good at as a city, and I, for one, will not participate in it.
That was council person Vanessa Hall Harper. My apologies for getting her name incorrect, and I'm sorry about that. You heard the councilwoman. She made it very clear what is really going on right now in Greenwood and what these politicians are doing. The vast majority of them doing a disservice to the black community of Greenwood, to the black community of Tulsa at large. Spitting in the eye, essentially, of survivors, of the descendants of the deceased, the descendants of survivors, of the people in Greenwood at large, the black people who have no town anymore. And they've never received any financial compensation whatsoever. Only in 2020, just last year, did any mass graves start to be excavated. Just last year. 99 years after this state-sanctioned violence and terrorism against black people by white people in Tulsa. Just imagine if the police rode into a white neighborhood and they would never do this. And they had told black people in other neighborhoods to, here's your gun, go and kill every white person you see. We're going to give you loads of rifles. We're going to give you loads of pistols. Can you imagine? As a white person, having hundreds, thousands of black people with weapons that the police, and again, this is a scenario that would never happen, that the police said, okay, here, we're going to give you all these guns. You go into their community, go into the white community right here, and kill every last one of those people you see. Of course, again, that would never, ever happen. And when Nat Turner, who was a preacher, as well as an enslaved person, did this in the 1820s, I believe it was, in Southampton, Virginia. It was an enslavement rebellion that lasted for several days. The police did not aid him. They did not aid him. There weren't really police around in 1823 in the United States. It was white violent mobs who killed him, put him to death, hung him, and then drew and quartered him and dismembered him and hung parts of his body in various places. That's what they did. And we are not coming to grips with any of this. We are not coming to grips. How is this society, again, I talked about this a little earlier, how is this society ever going to be a so-called good nation, a great nation, if it's not feeding the homeless, if it's not giving universal health care, Medicare for all, if it's not, how can you be calling yourself a great nation? What are you great in? Violence? Military might? Dropping bombs in other countries? Allowing police to continue to murder black people? Is that what you're great at? We cannot become what we want to become. And I'm here paraphrasing Mr. Baldwin, as I ever do. Unless we start to look at ourselves and ask why, just why, we live in a state of fantasy that is so very dangerous. It clouds us. It prevents us from seeing ourselves as we actually are. What we've been doing, thanks to television and social media and a whole lot of other things, including apps on phones, is presenting and projecting ourselves as we would like to be, as we hope to be, as we want to be, instead of as we actually are. And the longer that persists, the more dangerous the situation that we are finding ourselves in becomes. This truly is the road to ruin. And it is not a message of comfort, because it is more uncomfortable to be living in a fantasy world where we think that we are exceptional. American exceptionalism. Than it is to confront the facts, the history, and the truth of where we are in the United States of America today. And we have to provide reparations to the families in Greenwood, in Tulsa, and beyond, across the country. All of the black families. Yes, all of those things have to be figured out, articulated, strategized, and how this would all proceed and play out will have to be looked at. It is far from impossible. Don't let anybody tell you, oh, well, you've got, like it's impossible. As I alluded to yesterday, the Victim Compensation Fund for 9/11/2001 was put in place. There are Republicans who then said, we're not renewing it. And Jon Stewart, the filmmaker, the director, the comedian, the activist, came down to Capitol Hill a year or two back, maybe back in 2019 or so, before COVID, and testified and said, damn it, this Victims Compensation Fund cannot be allowed to lapse. You need to renew this. Do not drag your heels. And they renewed it. That's a form of reparations. Why is everybody so, we can't do that for black people, when just 20 years ago, not even exactly 20 years ago, you had 9/11/2001, and just 2 years or so ago, Jon Stewart comes in and testifies, and voila, the House of Representatives reauthorizes the VCF for survivors directly affected by the health hazards of 9/11/2001, a terrorist attack. But we can't do the same thing for the terrorist attack of 1921 in Greenwood? We can't do that for survivors who were still alive, people who were still alive. I played you the audio yesterday of Viola Fletcher, 107 years old. Here is just a piece of that once again for you, as a reminder.
On May 31st in 21, I went to bed in my family's home in Greenwood, neighbors of Tulsa. The neighborhood I felt asleep in that night was rich, not just in terms of wealth, but in culture, community, heritage, and my family had a beautiful home. We had great neighbors, and I had friends to play with. I felt safe. I had everything a child could need. I had a bright future ahead of me. Greenwood could, Still, Greenwood should have given me the chance to truly make it in this country. Within a few hours, all of that was gone. The night of the massacre, I was awakened by my family. My parents and 5 siblings were there. I was told we had to leave, and that was it. I will never forget the violence of the white mob when we left our home. I still see black men being shot, black bodies lying in the street. I still smell smoke and see fire. I still see black businesses being burned. I still hear airplanes flying overhead. I hear the screams. I have lived through the massacre every day. Our country may forget this history, but I cannot. I will not, and other survivors do not.
So where is the reparations money for Viola Fletcher, for her descendants, for other survivors, the 2 other survivors from 100 years ago today? Where is their money? Where is the resources for them and the people of Greenwood? And this is state-sponsored terrorism. This isn't someone from Saudi Arabia or from somewhere else coming into the United States. This is what the city and the state did to these people. And the police department in Tulsa giving out guns to the Klan. Go on, shoot you some, and you know they didn't say black people. And if governments can't give out these monies for the wrongs that they did, how can you call the United States this great bastion? How can you possibly do that? And you've got politicians saying, this is not who we are. That is such an evil betrayal of the history that stares you right in your face, to be telling people that this is not who we are is an absolute betrayal, not only of history, but of your own common sense. I'm talking about politicians who now reside in the White House saying this. It's so utterly pathetic to know that people who are now in the White House have said this recently. This is exactly who we are. And the problem is that when people say this is not who we are, it does the very brutal damage that reinforces the oppression, the denial of that, the denial that the oppression exists presently, is what is so corrosive so damaging, so dangerous. It's poisonous. And it poisons us all, which is why we have to speak out, which is why we have to start helping the community in Greenwood. Go to Greenwood for Justice. And excuse me, Justice for Greenwood. Justice, JUSTICEFOR, Greenwood, GREENWOOD.org. There's ways you can get involved. I want you to get in touch with the governor, the Republican governor of the state of Oklahoma, at GOV, S as in Sam, TITT. That is his handle on Twitter. I want you to call him as well. I want you to call the mayor of Tulsa, who seems like, if I get this correct, a very forward-thinking person. You can contact him as well. He was featured in the documentary on PBS yesterday entitled Tulsa, the Fire and the Forgotten. Seems like he really does want to get to the bottom of this. But the problem is, it's all well and good to get to the bottom of this and excavate the bodies and find out how many more people's remains are there. Because people are walking on a crime scene, as has been said before. This is an absolute crime scene. The whole nation's a crime scene, let alone Greenwood. We're walking on stolen land. We're walking on it. And dead bodies are buried. The African burial ground in Manhattan, in New York City. I went to that burial ground a few years ago. Graves. Black people's bodies. Right there by Wall Street. And it was called Wall Street in Manhattan because they were auctioning, selling and buying black people, enslaved black people. They would hold auctions right there in Wall Street. And when people talk about in the black, as they do in the stock market now, what do you think in the black meant? In the black meant, oh, I've got more black people. It's about the people that they bought and sold. Us. That's what in the black means. That's where it came from. In the red, what do you think that meant? In the red meant that you were not doing so well with your black person. You had to kill them. You hadn't purchased so many of us today. And those terms are still being used for the stock market. In the red, the company, Apple, is in the red today. It declined 3% on its shares. In the red, blood. You lost. You lost your black person. In the black, you gained your black person. Stocks rise sharply as Amazon is in the black. It reported a profit in this last quarter of a staggering 23%. And now Jeff Bezos is a trillionaire. He may not be the world's most richest person, but he's still got money to burn in his sleep to keep his dreams and nightmares warm, let alone himself. We have to look at ourselves. We have to look at the country we live in. We have to look at the way we behave, at the way violence has happened in this country to us, to black people. We must have reparations. And by the way, these things are beginning to happen. In California, there is again, and I said this earlier, there were black towns all over this country called the US of A that were run by black people. They were self-sufficient. They weren't asking the government for anything. See, here's the other thing. Oh, you're on welfare. Oh, you're this. Oh, you depend on the government. No, no, and freaking no. There were black people all over this country who built their own towns, had their own economies, had their own schools, had their own doctor's offices, dentists, theaters, grocery stores, hairdressers, bar, etc. I could go on ad infinitum. Fairgrounds. And it was taken from them by white mobs. Facts. Facts. These are the facts. This is the history that no one, well, not no one, that people, many of them white, will not look at, will not touch, don't care about. In California, there was a town in Southern California owned by black people. It's called Bruce's Beach. Look it up. Please do not believe what I'm saying. All of what I'm saying is documented. You do not have to trust what I'm saying. Now, I wouldn't come on here and lie to you. If I'm lying to you, I can just stop doing this podcast. But listen, what I am telling you is facts, are facts, is the truth, is the history, is the present. Bruce's Beach in Southern California was taken by force from black people. It was a black-owned town. And now in California, what are they doing? They're seeking to restore that town to the descendants of the owners, of the black owners. I'm trying to get in touch with one of the council persons in, I guess it's Manhattan Beach, down there not far from Los Angeles, that is helping out in this effort to make sure that this town, Bruce's Beach, is properly returned to the descendants of the original owners. In Evanston, Illinois, reparations measures have just been implemented for people in the state of Illinois who are eligible, I guess, or who apply, who it pertains to, black people. And it's connected to enslavement, and it's connected to Evanston, Illinois. That measure and that effort is going on right now. And payments are expected to be given soon, if not already, to black people who can establish certain criteria. There's talks about some of this too in Oakland, California. And there may well be in other parts of the United States here in 2021. So do not tell me that reparations aren't possible. Oh, it's too much. Heard Bernie Sanders say that one time. Oh, it is too much. And these Republicans forget it. These garbage bags. I mean, they oh no. But we can waste taxpayer money on freaking governor recalls. And we can spend money on making sure that people aren't taught the truth and what happened in Greenwood. Oh, we can't make white people uncomfortable. So if you teach that in the school where the truth can make you free, if you teach that about what happened in Greenwood exactly 100 years ago, oh, we're going to take your job from you. You could lose your job. You might go to prison, you know. You might be living in a fascist state, you know. You might be living in a banana republic. You might be Naomi Osaka, who, God forbid, if she doesn't talk to the press, she gets expelled from tournaments and so has to withdraw to protect her mental health. Do not tell me that reparations are not possible. Do not tell me that it's so convoluted and difficult. It's only difficult if you don't want to get it done. Like everything, things take time, but that doesn't mean they cannot be done and should not be done. I've just offered you at least 2 examples of places in the United States right now. I've offered you 3 examples where reparations are happening or in the process of happening. The Victim Compensation Fund from 9/11, that's a form of reparations. They may not use the R word, but it's a form of reparations. That fund is allowed to be extended to 2036 or something. or whatever the year is that it goes to. Don't tell me reparations aren't possible. The Japanese Americans got reparations after what happened to them in turn and put in concentration camps and internment camps. Black people were put in concentration camps and internment camps. Where's our reparations? Where's our 40 acres and a mule? Exactly. Do not tell me that reparations are not possible. I told you. The Japanese Americans quite rightly got theirs. They received apologies. Do not tell me that reparations aren't possible. It only seems, dear listener, that reparations are not possible for black folk. Somehow when it comes to us, it can't be done, and it's so complex, and how are we going to do it? We would just do it. We sit down and work it out. Like people in Evanston, like the officials there, and we pressure them. Like what we've seen in California, Bruce's Beach. Oh, please. Oh, it can't be. It can't be done in Greenwood. Yeah, but. As Malcolm X says, we've got all this legislation passed, as he once said. Got all this legislation done for everyone else, and now they bring up you. Or as I would put it, they never bring up you. They just go on and pretend, you don't matter. And so now you've got Oklahoma, this same governor, signing bills into law saying you can't teach about Greenwood. The Republican governor. Texas, same, you can't teach the fact that black people were enslaved and that Japanese Americans were put in internment camps and the Chinese Exclusion Act, because it might make white people uncomfortable, you see. That is a country that is in serious trouble.
Where does the lawsuit stand here in Tulsa, and what has the federal government's response been?
Absolutely. The good thing about a lawsuit is it's not termed a quote-unquote reparations lawsuit, but essentially that's what it is. And so where it stands is that we're utilizing the same state law that the state of Oklahoma utilized just a couple years ago to successfully sue the Johnson & Johnson opioid companies. And so we feel really good about our opportunities to move forward. On Tuesday, June 1st, the 100-year anniversary of the massacre, we will be filing our response to the defendant's motion to dismiss, and then we'll be moving forward. Hopefully, the judge will allow us to move forward our case. From the federal government standpoint, we asked them to do for our survivors and descendants what they've done for the Japanese, who were in turn what they did for victims and survivors of 9/11 terrorist attack, is to provide legislation that will provide a victims' compensation fund.
That was attorney Demario Solomon Simmons with Tiffany Cross on her show over the weekend. And he has filed a lawsuit, as you heard there, for reparations in Greenwood, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Don't tell me reparations aren't possible. Don't tell me reparations can't happen. You just heard him echoing exactly what I said before the break. This has been done with the 9/11 families and people seeking compensation as a result of the toxic effects of what happened down at the World Trade Center. And the Victim Compensations Fund is renewed by Congress. He mentioned what I mentioned earlier, which is the Japanese Americans are being compensated for the brutalities and indignities that the U.S. government visited upon them. State-sanctioned, thrown in concentration camps and internment camps. So why is it now that black folk are now being met with such resistance? Don't tell me that reparations aren't possible, and don't tell me that it's too complicated. That is not an excuse. And I will not allow that to be some excuse. as to not doing what should be done. This happened in Greenwood, and it happened in all those other towns that I read out earlier, and many more that I didn't read out. Do not tell me that this is not possible. When I cited you, Bruce's Beach, when I cited you, Evanston, Illinois, in 2021, right now. And as Demario Solomon Simmons said there in that audio you just heard, today he is filing that lawsuit, and we'll see what happens with it. I am not privy yet to any news on it, but I'll be sure to let you know what the outcome is. And we'll keep going on that and let you know. You say reparations to some people and they piss their pants. When you think about it, you sue someone for breaking your foot. The money you get from that suit, if you are successful in that civil suit, is a form of reparations. It's to repair. It's to compensate. It's not going to reverse the injury that happened to you when some jackass ran over your foot. It's going to give you a measure of recognition from the compensator that says to you, here, I acknowledge you suffered your injury, and here's our payment to you because of what we did. That's a form of reparations. Why are we defining this like it's a boogeyman in a room? Oh, it's compensatory damages, Omar. It's not reparation. It's reparations. It's reparations. Of course. I mean, as an attorney, I should know this as well as anyone. We have to be so definitional. I know about compensatory damages. I know about punitive damages. I've dealt with cases that deal with those things. I've studied that in law school. But it's just another way of saying reparations. And people get so afraid. Ooh, reparations. Oh my God. They want to burn the country down. They want reparations. And that's the thinking in this country by a great many people, some of them black, as well as a large number, in my view, of white people sitting there going, oh, and they're afraid. But they seem to be more afraid of that word than they are of the fact that these terrorist acts and murders happened widespread to black people. That seems to be less of a concern or less of a fear for them. But reparations, oh my God, my heart beats faster. I get anxious. I get apprehensive. What do those black people want? Oh my God, I'm scared. Oh my goodness. I'm crapping my pants right now because they want money to repair some of that damage, to at least acknowledge and respect them. And I'm afraid of that they want that for themselves. Ooh, I feel small and insecure now because those people over there, their black folk, they want money for the murders that we committed against them or that our ancestors committed against them. And I'm afraid now. They're going to come after me. They're going to burn down my home. They're going to take my wife. They're going to take my kids. They're going to take me. Oh my God. The world is coming to an end for me. And I'm telling you, that, in my view, is how some white people think about this. They will never admit that. And maybe if you're white listening to this, you've probably heard some people voice this. Or maybe you've not. Maybe you thought like this. Maybe you've not. Maybe you're on the side of saying, as I suspect some of you listening probably are, on the side of saying that black people should be getting reparations for all of these atrocities, Greenwood included. And if you are, make sure that you keep educating people in your community, in your family, in your workplace. Next time you hear some coworker say some ignorant ass thing, pull their coat to it. As a white person, you should use that privilege. Do it. If you're an anti-racist, you should also do it. Don't let that garbage pass, especially if you've been watching these documentaries the past night or two. And this is not just a commemoration. This is something that you should regularly be educating people you know about. Not just on June the 1st, but on any day of any week of any year. I wish Mr. Solomon Simmons or Simmons Solomon, I wish him the very best of this lawsuit. And we've got to support people like this attorney and like the community, like Congress, the councilwoman that I played the audio of earlier. Vanessa Hill Harper, I believe was her name. Because these are the people who aren't getting the airtime on the mainstream corporate news media. If you listen to Watch Roland Martin Unfiltered, however, you will see people like the councilwoman. She's the kind of person that should be getting the platform to be spoken to. And she was, by the way, in the documentary yesterday entitled Tulsa, the Fire and the Forgotten, directed by Jonathan Silvers. She is really good. I would really like to talk to her because she articulates this in the ways that it needs to be articulated in. Not some bourgeois knee-shaking, buck-dancing black politician. We need to have real, authentic. Not that this person who's part of Greenwood Rising is not real or authentic. He has a right to his view, just like I have a right to mine and you have a right to yours. But someone who is not an impediment to progress. Someone who's not going to just kowtow with some fake-ass ribbon-cutting ceremony. Aren't we so great? We recognize the 100-year mark of this atrocity. And we want to make everyone know that we're not that bad after all here in Tulsa. That's what the operative effect of Greenwood Rising is. It's a guilt-purging exercise. And we are not having it. The black folk in Tulsa are not having it. The residents of Greenwood are not having it. The councilwoman is not having it. Nor is Tiffany Crutcher or Christy Williams. Both of them descendants of people murdered in Greenwood. One of them, Tiffany Crutcher, is the twin sister of Terrence Crutcher, who in 2016 was assassinated by a white female cop named Betty Jo Shelby in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The whole thing was caught on video. He had his hands up and she shot him in the back of his head, killing him. Whole thing caught on video. And she went to trial and she was acquitted. Not guilty. Same Tulsa, Oklahoma. This is what we're dealing with. Or not dealing with, as the case may be.
Anybody who thinks that this crime scene is not going to speak doesn't have the ears to hear. The ancestors are awake, and the earth is shaking.
Dreamland, The Burning of Black Wall Street is directed by Salima Karoma. The documentary is available on CNN Go and will be rebroadcast on CNN this Saturday, June the 6th, 2021.
The root of the black man's hatred is rage, and he does not so much hate white men as simply wants them out of his way. And more than that, out of his children's way. The root of the white man's hatred is terror, a bottomless and nameless terror, which focuses on this dread figure, an entity which lives only in his mind. When Sidney jumps off the train, the white liberal people downtown were much relieved and joyful. But when black people saw him jump off the train, they yelled, "Get back on the train, you fool." The black man jumps off the train in order to reassure white people, to make them know that they are not hated, that though they have made human errors, they done nothing for which to be hated.
That was an excerpt from I Am Not Your Negro. James Baldwin. That was the voice of Samuel L. Jackson reading the words of James Baldwin from his unfinished manuscript, Remember This House. And as I have said often, that is one of the central truths. Black people just want to be able to live their lives. We don't want anybody getting in our way. We want to live our lives. That's all we're doing. We're just walking down the street with Skittles. We don't need to have a George Zimmerman shoot us point blank in our hearts, killing us. We don't need that. We're just trying to live our lives. We're not troubling anyone. We just want people out of our way so that we can just live our lives. We're not doing anything to anybody. Why are you coming up to me and following me? Why are you driving your police cruiser right up to me? Why are you stopping me on the street? I'm not doing anything. We're not doing anything. We're just living our lives like you're just living yours. Are you that miserable that you just have to start something? You have to come up to us? You have to stand within 2 inches of us in a grocery store line? You have to say something racist? You can't just keep yourself to yourself? What is wrong with you? You are obviously in problem with yourself. You have an issue with yourself that you don't like. It's something about you. You have no soul. Something's wrong with you. Yes, you're hateful. Yes, you're racist. There's something else in addition to that. You hate yourself. Why won't you just leave people be? Stop attacking Asian people. And I know there are other people who attack Asians as well. But what is wrong with you? And that's what James Baldwin is talking about. We just want to live our lives. It's not our skin color that's the problem. If that's the liability, really? Don't let anybody tell you, dear listener, that a black person's skin color is the reason why they're being discriminated against. It's something about that white person that is the reason that a black person is being discriminated against. Our skin color is not the issue. It's not. And think about that carefully when you hear me say that to you. It's not the issue. It's the people in power who have some issue that is the problem here. Not your skin color. not my skin color. We have to define these things properly. All we want to do is live our lives, thrive like the people in Greenwood, in Rosewood, and all these other black towns all over this country. And we try to do that, and then you've got white people burning the town down. You've got white people killing us. So it's not our skin color. It's something about those white people who now, oh my gosh, they've got houses, they've got homes and businesses. We've got to burn that down. That is not our skin color. That is something to do with those white people who do those kinds of things, who arm themselves to the gills. When you've got black people walking down the street in a peaceful protest. Why are you armed? Why? Why is Kyle Rittenhouse got an AR-15, 17-year-old terrorist? Why has he got an AR-17 protecting a boarded up business at night? Why is he crossing in from Illinois to Wisconsin, to Kenosha, Wisconsin, to protect a business, he says? And the business you see him standing in front of last August 2020 is boarded up. And he's got an AR-15. So how is that protecting a business? Oh, we're here to protect a business. Why are you doing that at night when it's already boarded up? You're not there to protect a business. You're there to commit violent acts at night because you know, and I know, and you know, dear listener, that at night, that's when shit gets down. That's when shit, whatever the shit is, goes down. Right? That's when people start to go buck wild. That's when people start to get violent. That's where things start to happen. Good, bad, or ugly. So you're there at night. You got an AR-15. What could possibly happen? All we want is for you to be out of our way. That's what that clip from I Am Not Your Negro is about. We just want you out of our way. We're not doing anything to you. You've got to sort out what the heck's going on in your brain. And you're in the dominant culture. You've got to figure out why it is you are so violent toward us, and you've got to stop. Your police have to stop. The violent choices that these governments make when they discriminate against you. When these companies discriminate, your workplace discriminates against you. You got no health care. You got a medical profession that doesn't take what you say seriously. You've got to ask yourself, and those are all forms of violence. You have to ask yourself, the people who do this, why are you so violent? Period. Period. I'm not even talking about, for this split second, I'm not even talking about against, why are you so violent in general? We're just here minding our business. 9 people in a church in Charleston, South Carolina, speaking of massacres, as I alluded to it earlier, in 2015, are sitting there worshiping. We invited you in. We invited Dylan Roof in. And what did he end up doing? Killing 9 of us. We welcomed that terrorist in. We didn't know he was a terrorist. We welcomed him in. The snake, right? It's what Trump says about the snake. You knew I was a snake. We didn't know this guy was. We came and welcomed him in. Then he pulls out guns and starts murdering us, killing 9 of us. We're a welcoming people. We're not saying any. We didn't have a burn a cross on his lawn. You've got to look at why. That's what this country's got to do. And stop talking about this is not who we are. And you've not compensated any of these people. We just want you out of our way. We are not looking to do anything to you. The paranoia that these people have is absolutely off the charts. And they have the nerve to say, oh, black people are so paranoid. No, we're friggin' not. It's you. It's you. Oh, those black people are going to get us. Oh, they're going to. Who's the paranoid one? It ain't us. It ain't us. It is not us. It's you. And you've got to figure out why. And you've got to stop this. Why doesn't Amy Cooper have to pick up her cell phone in Central Park and call the police and lie and say that the guy, the black man, who's bird watching, for God's sake, in Central Park, is going to attack? Oh, he attacked me. He threatened me. It's nothing of the sort. What is wrong with you? Can't you just leave black folk alone? Can't you leave brown people alone and Asian people? Can't you just let them live? Let us live. Let us live. Let us live. My goodness. Is it too much to ask? Greenwood, 100 years ago today. Never forget. And dare I say, never, ever again. Thank you very much for listening to this edition of the Politicrat. May the people of Greenwood stand tall and forever endure. I'm Omar Moore.
And I can tell you this, the very folks that go out and kill other folks, right? I say this all the time. Dead people kill people. Dead people are out here on the streets with the AK-47s. They have no spirit of humanity. They have no spirit of God. So they're already dead. That's why they have no problem killing you. So I'm going to continue to live. I'm going to continue to say, as long as I got breath, right? We got time to get it right. So as long as I got life, we got time to get it right. And we hold on to that. Other than that, we go crazy.